Donny Osmond, a name that once fluttered through radios, glowed on television screens, and echoed through the hearts of millions. A man not simply adored, but entrusted with the fragile innocence of an entire generation. His voice, tender yet fierce, carried the promise of youth, of purity, of love untouched by cynicism. He was not only a singer or a performer, he was America's reflection during a time when belief itself felt like a melody. From the radiant glow of Donny and Marie to the timeless ache of puppy love, his songs became the heartbeat of a nation's adolescence, reverberating through first crushes, high school dances, and long car rides beneath the glittering promise of the 1970s. He was the boy from Utah who carried not just ambition, but faith, lifting both his family and his dreams on shoulders far too young to bear their weight. Behind his luminous grin hid an untold exhaustion, the silent cost of perfection. Beneath applause, the echoes of pain lingered, unseen, unspoken, unending. And even now, at 67, when serenity should be his well-earned companion, one wonders, what storms still haunt the quiet corners of his heart? Comet 67, or Right Rip Donny, Osmond to honor him. The smile America adored began long before the cameras ever rolled. Donny Osmond's childhood was not painted with playground laughter, but with the hum of studio lights and the scent of hot stage paint. While other children chased daylight, he chased rehearsals. Born on December 9th, 1957, in Ogden, Utah, he was the seventh of 9, a child of devotion, discipline, and song. His parents, George and Olive, molded music not as a pastime, but as a covenant. George, a veteran who had once marched through war, now commanded his household with the same precision. Olive's voice, gentle but unwavering, filled their modest home with hymns and harmony. It was a family built on unity, and in unity, a legacy was born. Two of Donny's brothers, Verl and Tom, were born deaf, their silence echoing through the household until music became their shared language. The young boy, all bright eyes and trembling sincerity, sang louder, not for applause, but so that his brothers might feel the rhythm pulse through the floorboards. He learned early that music was not just sound, it was touch, vibration, faith. If they couldn't hear me, he once whispered, maybe they could still feel me. And they did. That yearning to reach the unreachable would become the defining truth of his life. In 1962, at just 5 years old, destiny arrived disguised as opportunity. His older brother's barbershop quartet churned their way onto The Andy Williams Show. When a producer asked if the youngest Osmond could sing, little Donny stepped into the light and offered, "You are my sunshine." The audience erupted. For a child, it was magic. For his family, it was prophecy. That single moment bound his future in gold and expectation. Overnight, the Osmonds became America's wholesome dream, and Donny, the cherubic emblem of its innocence. But what began as wonder quickly hardened into duty. The Osmonds traded the quiet rhythm of Ogden for the endless hum of Los Angeles, where childhood was rehearsed rather than lived. Mistakes weren't lessons, they were sins against the image they carried. In a home where faith ruled and perfection was proof of grace, Donny learned to smile even when his spirit faltered. By 10, he wasn't merely Donny Osmond, he was a trademark, a symbol. The nation's clean-cut hope. The child who never said no because saying no felt like breaking the world's heart. The cheers that once filled him now pressed in, heavy and unrelenting. He'd sit backstage sometimes, his small feet not quite reaching the ground, whispering his lines to no one. Not because he forgot them, but because without them, he wasn't sure who he was. He did not rebel. He prayed. He transformed pressure into rhythm, fear into melody. Andy Williams himself taught him not just to sing, but to breathe through fear, a skill that would become his secret weapon. Friends became fans. Summers turned into schedules. Applause replaced affection. His life was a performance wrapped in reverence. And still, even as the world demanded perfection, he carried grace. He wasn't a boy chasing dreams. He was a boy carrying them for his parents, for his faith, for his brothers who could not hear the world that adored him. In that fragile balance between obligation and yearning, the legend began. Not built on glitter, but on gravity. Not from what he received, but from all he was forced to surrender. Comment 67. Or right ripped Donny Osmond to honor him. The noise never stopped. By 1970, 12-year-old Donny's voice had become America's lullaby. The Osmonds' hit One Bad Apple climbed to #1, transforming the family into a cultural phenomenon. Their faces adorned cereal boxes, lunchboxes, posters. They were the nation's dream, a living ideal of purity and harmony. But within that dream, the pressure mounted like a storm. Fame did not rise like dawn. It flooded, drowning the boy beneath the applause. He was too young to drive, but old enough to headline stadiums. Fans screamed his name with a fervor that blurred adoration and possession. Every night, before the curtain rose, he would whisper to himself, "Don't mess up." The words weren't confidence, they were survival. Under the merciless lights, his smile glowed with divine brightness. But behind it, he trembled. "I lived inside a photograph," he would later say. "I smiled because I had to." His father's discipline was unyielding, his mother's devotion equally fierce. In their eyes, success wasn't a choice, it was a mission. To sing was to serve. To falter was to fail God himself. By 1972, puppy love made Donny a sensation, America's sweetheart. Yet that love was conditional, fenced in by the illusion of purity. No teenage mistakes, no rebellion, no heartbreak. "You're the good boy," the world reminded him. The wholesome one. The one who belonged to everyone but himself. While other boys whispered secrets under bleachers, Donny rehearsed beneath stage lights. When his voice cracked, they called it discipline. When his joy faltered, they called it humility. No one saw the price. "I didn't have a youth," he said later. "I had a career." At 14, he couldn't walk a block without chaos erupting. Fans fainted, screamed, cried, as if touching him might heal something within themselves. But each touch chipped away at the boy inside. Letters piled up, unopened, like echoes of a love he could never return. "Fame doesn't wait for grief," he whispered once. "It just keeps moving." The louder the cheers grew, the smaller he became. Comment 67 or write RIP Donny Osmond to honor him. Then came 1976, the Donny and Marie Show, the glittering summit of his career, and perhaps the most exhausting chapter of his life. The perfect siblings, smiling week after week for an audience that believed in their joy more than they did. Behind the curtain, Donny's reflection became a stranger. "When the red light went on, I turned on too," he said. "When it went off, I didn't know who I was." The world adored his perfection, but mocked it in the same breath. Too clean, critics scoffed. Too pure. The very virtue that had built his fame now isolated him. His identity, once worshipped, had become a cage. One night, after filming Wrapped, he stood alone on the empty set. The laughter faded, the lights dimmed, and in the silence, he whispered to no one, "Is this what love sounds like when it's gone?" The words dissolved into the hollow dark. Yet even then, he refused to disappear. He sang through fatigue, danced through doubt, prayed through ridicule. What once was ambition had become endurance. Every note a plea, every bow an act of faith. The stage, once his prison, had become his altar. He sang not for fame, but for survival, for remembrance, for peace. Comment 67 or write RIP Donny Osmond to honor him. By 1976, he stood before millions each week, smiling, spinning, shining, while inside, He trembled beneath the weight of being everyone's promise. The Donny Marie Show reached over 14 million viewers weekly, a nation's shared heartbeat. But every glittering broadcast came with hidden pain. 12-hour rehearsals, endless interviews, the mechanical repetition of perfection. There wasn't time to feel anything, he admitted. Not joy, not sadness, just duty. When the cameras cooled, he'd linger on the stage, alone, staring at empty seats once filled with cheers. The echo mocked him of its absence. His family's empire, built on faith and song, began to crack beneath its own success. Investments faltered, debts grew, and behind the perfect smiles lay sleepless nights and unpaid bills. By 1979, the empire had fallen silent. Nearly $20 million lost. The Osmonds were bankrupt, their legacy collapsing under the same weight that once lifted them. Donny, barely in his 20s, shouldered not only his own despair, but that of a family who had given everything to the dream. He smiled for the cameras still, but inside he was unraveling. The industry that once worshipped him now turned away. They said I was too old for pop, too clean for rock, he murmured. I didn't belong anywhere. And yet, somehow, he kept singing. Comment 67 or write Rip Donny Osmond to honor him. The doors that once flew open for him began to close with a quiet cruelty. Phones that used to ring at all hours fell silent. In the industry's harsh arithmetic, the boy wonder had somehow aged out before he had truly become a man. He tried on new looks the way a soul tries on courage. Longer hair, different jackets, darker shades of sound, only to be told that purity could not learn swagger and that sincerity did not sell. He would walk into rooms where his own posters had once hung and feel like a stranger. Assistants blinked at his name, executives measured him by a season that had passed, and the music inside him throbbed against a wall of indifference. But he was stubborn in the gentlest way a person can be, the kind of resolve born not of ego, but of duty. If they would not see him, he would still sing. If they would not remember him, he would still show up. He learned to pour his voice into emptier halls, to read the tremor of a half-full room, to love the sound of honest applause, even when it came from fewer hands. Humility replaced frenzy, and in those lean years, the boy with the polished smile turned into a craftsman, sanding the grain of his voice, listening for the truth that comes only after the noise has died. Comment 67, or write Rip Donny Osmond to honor him out of that quiet. A song emerged, sleek yet tender, guarded but yearning, like confidence reborn after a long winter. Soldier of Love didn't just arrive, it slipped back into a world that had forgotten how to hear him. Radio loved the sound, but balked at the name. So the music went out without a face, a melody loose from its history, and the public embraced it with disarming honesty. The track climbed, step by anonymous step, until the truth could no longer hide. The voice that moved them belonged to the man so many had insisted was finished. It was not a triumphant shout, but a resurrection whispered into a microphone. When the reveal landed, people blinked, surprised first, then warmed by recognition. He hadn't come back as a museum of nostalgia. He returned as an artist tempered in fire. Every closed door had carved new colors into his tone. Every hard night had given him a deeper breath. The applause this time did not feel like a cage. It felt like permission to be new, to be himself. And with that small, enormous mercy, he stood straighter, not with glittering bravado, but with the quiet poise of a survivor who has finally earned his own name. Comment 67, or write Rip Donny Osmond to honor him, long before that comeback. Before industry winters and anonymous releases, there had been an autumn afternoon on a high school field. Light catching in blonde hair, a cheer rising for someone else. He was 17, already tired from being adored, and she was 15, unaware of the way she had just interrupted the future. Debbie Glenn moved like a secret whispered across a crowded room. He noticed, then tried not to. He watched for 3 years, not out of timidity, but out of reverence. Fame had taught him to be careful with what mattered. When he finally asked, she said yes, and their youth found a hidden road in the Utah hills. Windows up, voices low, 2 hearts choosing the quiet over the noise. In a world that demanded spectacle from him, he wanted something small and true. He knew, the way the desert knows where water is, that she was it. The certainty frightened him a little, the way grace often does. But he held on anyway, not as a star, not as a brand. Just as a boy finding a place to be ordinary. Comment 67. Or write Rip Donny Osmond to honor them. The wedding was less a performance than a vow whispered into the storm. It was May 1978, and the choice he made that day was an act of defiance wrapped in tenderness. Headlines scolded, stations snickered, and a nation that had once claimed him tried to repossess the myth. As if love were a betrayal of the fantasy people had purchased with posters and magazine clippings. The letters were sharp, some cruel, some confused. Debbie bore the brunt of an impossible expectation, targeted for daring to be the reality that outlived the dream. He stepped on stage days later to a cheer that sounded different, still loud but edged with judgment, still vast but suddenly conditional. Yet the vow outlasted the scorn. He sang not to reclaim an audience but to build a life. They pieced together a home with hand-me-down furniture and the holiness of ordinary days, burnt toast that tasted like victory, laughter that felt like sunrise, and rooms that measured their wealth in grace instead of square footage. At night, when fatigue threatened their tenderness, they learned the sacred choreography of apology and forgiveness, the unshowy disciplines of staying. Comment 67 or write R.I.P. Donny Osmond to honor him. Then came collapse and responsibility braided together. The show canceled. The numbers brutal, the duds like a winter that refused to end. He toured because the lights had to stay on, because children needed shoes and warmth and lullabies. Casinos, county fairs, back rooms with sticky floors and hearts who still remembered. He gave each space his best, never sneering at the size of the crowd. He called home to listen to breathing on the other end of the line, to remember that love is made of ordinary sounds. He would return to find the television glowing with a younger version of himself upon it, a time-stamped echo that felt both tender and cruel. There were quiet arguments at the kitchen counter, not about love, but about exhaustion, the ache of distance, the math of bills, the loneliness that shadows a good marriage trying to survive bad circumstances. And then a note on a counter in handwriting he knew by heart. Love doesn't need you perfect. It needs you present. He kept that line like a talisman, a commandment kinder than any rule he had learned in childhood, a permission slip to be human. Comment 67 or write Rip Donny Osmond to honor them. When the anonymous single began its climb years later, the victory registered in the smallest room of the house. Laundry folded, radio on, a melody turning the air electric. "It's you," she said into the phone, tears turning the ordinary into miracle. The chart placement mattered. The recognition mattered more. But the real triumph was domestic. A kitchen that smelled like soap, a floor scattered with toys, a life that had endured long enough to witness renewal. The world called it a comeback. They called it Tuesday, then Wednesday, then all the days after, the faithful accumulation of ordinary hours in which joy quietly builds its cathedral. They raised 5 sons, Donny Jr., Jeremy, Brandon, Christopher, and Joshua, not as trophies but as testaments. The house filled with clatter and chatter, with laughter that could drown out the shadows of headlines, with prayers spoken as naturally as breathing. He learned the happiness of being interrupted, the holiness of losing your train of thought because a child is asking you for help. He found himself again in the routine of dadhood, in car rides and repeated stories, in music hums at bedtime, and that particular silence that happens only after all the little ones have finally fallen asleep. And in that quiet, he would feel gratitude expand like lungs after a deep breath. Comment 67 or a right. R.I.P. Donny Osmond. To honor him, years became proof. 40-plus anniversaries marked not by fireworks, but by hands held through hospital beeps and jet-lagged sermons about hope, by dinners eaten late and early morning walks on desert trails. Those trails, with their red earth and whispering sage, watch them become elders of their own story, not untouchable icons, but a pair who chose each other again and again. He learned that romance is less a crescendo than a long sustain, that the loudest proof of devotion is often the quietest gesture. Time, once his enemy, softened into a companion. The scandal of their youth that he dared to love mellowed into one of show business's gentlest miracles. Watching grandkids race across floors became better than standing ovations. The echo of arenas could never compete with the thud of small feet running toward him. He laughed more easily now, the way people do when they have nothing left to prove. The spotlight, once an unblinking judge, now felt like an occasional visitor. Gratitude replaced striving, and endurance turned into a kind of art. Comment 67, or right, rip Donny Osmond. To honor him, what the world called a brand, he treated as a calling, not to preserve an image, but to serve a craft. He kept singing because singing had always been his truest way of telling the truth. He would enter a rehearsal space and greet the air like an old friend. Scales in the morning, not to chase perfection, but to tend the instrument that had carried him across decades. His voice, once polished to a shine, now held the grain of survival. The high notes came not as displays of power, but as declarations of tenderness. I'm still here. I still care. I still mean it. Perspective had taught him to treasure the audience as participants rather than worshippers, witnesses rather than judges. He spoke more between songs, not to sell nostalgia, but to share the small wisdoms gleaned from staying. People brought their children and their parents. 3 generations blending into one memory, proof that some melodies do not belong to a single decade, but to the ache and solace that thread through every human life. He received their affection without trying to own it. He offered his story without demanding that anyone make it their own. He had finally learned the paradox at the heart of entertainment. The less you attempt to be everything, the more room you make for everyone. Comment 67, or right, rip Donny Osmond. To honor him. The past no longer felt like a place to remain, but a garden to visit. He could walk the rows and name each season, the early blaze of sudden fame, the cold middle of forgotten years, the springtime of an unexpected hit, the long summer of family. He forgave what had once embittered him, the jokes, the dismissals, the gates slammed in his face because they had turned him into a person he recognized and respected. There is a dignity in getting up when you are not expected, in choosing craft over clamor, covenant over approval. He held that dignity not like a medal, but like breath. At night, he sometimes imagined the earliest stages again, the studio lights humming, his small shoes dangling off a chair, a cue whispered by someone just out of frame. He would see the child he once was, and instead of rescuing him, he'd simply nod. You did well. You endured. You gave the very best of yourself, and when it wasn't enough for others, you kept it enough for your own soul. The applause that once felt like oxygen had become simply weather, sometimes sunny, sometimes storming, never the point. The point was the song. It had always been the song. Comment 67, or right, rip Donny Osmond. To honor him. Every life, no matter how luminous, eventually meets its shadows. For Donny Osmond, those shadows came in the form of silence, not the silence of the stage between songs, but the silence of loss, the kind that stretches across years and buries itself in the marrow of a man who has already given the world everything he had to offer. It began in 2004, when his mother, Olive, passed away. She had been more than a parent. She was rhythm, warmth, and gentle authority all woven into one heartbeat. Her kitchen smelled of bread and discipline. Her voice could both soothe and correct in the same breath. She was the reason 9 children could live as one choir, the invisible conductor behind every perfect harmony. When she died, the air around Donny thinned. He remembered her hands dusted with flour, snapping the beat as she taught them to sing in time. Teaching love the way others teach arithmetic, by repetition, he stood beneath the stage, lights the night the news came. The crowd was cheering, unaware that his world had cracked in half. The song has ended, he murmured to the audience, but the melody will never die. After the show, he sat in his dressing room, her photograph propped beside the mirror, bulbs glowing softly around it like candles. For the first time, the reflection looking back at him didn't smile. In the hush that followed, he realized that applause could not fill that absence. Grief, he discovered, wasn't thunder. It was an echo, quiet, endless, tender. Comment 67 or write Rip Olive Osmond to honor her. 3 years later, 2007, the second silence arrived. His father, George Osmond, the steadfast soldier who had built the family like a regiment, was gone. George was a Marine by training, a patriarch by purpose. His eyes saw discipline as devotion, and he raised his children with the firmness of a commander and the heart of a craftsman. Donny often joked that he could march before he could walk, and it wasn't far from the truth. Praise was scarce, but pride was constant. He remembered the silhouette of his father standing in the back row during a performance, arms folded, chin set, eyes shimmering, approval unspoken but felt. When George died, that steady presence vanished out at the casket. Donny didn't see the drill sergeant who had demanded excellence. He saw the man who once held his small shoulders after a show, who believed that work was worship and that music was the family's ministry. In his father's absence, Donny reached for the rhythm that had kept him upright all those years. He wore George's military ring on a chain, tracing its edges on nights when sleep would not come. "Am I still marching right, Dad?" He would whisper into the dark. The only reply came in dreams, boots against a wooden floor, slow and steady, keeping time for a son who still needed it. Comment 67. Or write Rip George Osmond to honor him. Grief has a way of multiplying when it's already heavy. The years that followed became a slow diminuendo, the sound of a great family's chorus fading one voice at a time. Verl, one of the eldest brothers, endured the silence of illness, communicating through gestures that carried more weight than words ever could. Meryl's voice began to thin, once golden and powerful, now fragile like parchment. And then came Wayne, the brother who mirrored Donny the most, his harmony partner, his onstage compass. They had shared microphones and dreams, laughter and exhaustion. Their voices stitched together so seamlessly that even silence seemed incomplete without both. When Wayne passed away at 73, the ache struck deep and irreversible. Donny wrote one line that said everything his voice could not: "I've lost my brother, my friend, and a piece of my harmony." At the memorial, he sang Puppy Love one last time. The microphone beside him stood empty, a single spotlight flickering like a candle for the brother who used to stand to his right. The audience wept, but Donny's eyes stayed fixed on that glowing void. When the final note faded, he let it linger, unfinished, unresolved, because grief, like love, never really ends. Afterward, when the room emptied, he stayed behind, running his hand over the cold microphone stand. "Each brother gone," he whispered, "is another verse missing from the song of my life." Comment 73 or write Rip Wayne Osmond to honor him, yet through every loss, every empty seat at the family table, he never stopped singing. For Donny, music was not just sound. It was communion, a way to keep the departed close. His mother's laughter, his father's rhythm, his brother's harmonies, all lived inside the chords he carried. The stage that once belonged to spectacle had become sacred ground, where he could call their names without speaking them. Grief, he learned, doesn't silence music. It just changes the key. He no longer sang for applause. He sang for remembrance. People often asked how he managed to keep performing through so much pain. His answer was simple, because silence hurts more. In every concert, in every encore, the audience could feel it. That subtle tremor of longing that made every note shimmer with gratitude and sorrow alike. Behind the familiar smile was a man who had made peace with the truth that joy and grief are twin notes in the same chord. Comment 67, or write R.I.P. Donny Osmond to honor him, but fate, relentless and precise, was not finished testing him. After losing so many outside battles, the next war came from within, invisible, intimate, terrifying. It began one quiet night in 2019, when numbness crept through his limbs, first his hands, then his legs, stealing rhythm from a body that had spent its whole life moving to music. The doctors called it a spinal misalignment, the price of decades spent leaping, bowing, bending, and giving. Surgery was the only option, but risk shadowed every word. What if the man who had danced across the world could never walk again? What if the body that had carried the songs of generations refused to answer? When he awoke from the operation, the ceiling blurred into sterile white. His legs did not respond. Panic gave way to silence. That old companion returned in a new disguise. He lay still, listening to the hum of machines, the beeping of monitors replacing the rhythm of applause. And once again, he felt small. Comment 67, or write RIP Donny Osmond to honor him. In the stillness of the hospital room, time slowed. Days stretched into aching hours of therapy, setbacks, pain, and the quiet despair of helplessness. Debbie stayed by his side, her devotion as constant as the machine's pulse. She slept in a hospital chair, her hand looped through his, refusing to let him drift away. He remembered the words she had written decades earlier. Love doesn't need you perfect. It needs you present. Now she was living that promise, one sleepless night at a time. Some mornings, he woke expecting applause. Instead, he heard the shuffle of nurses and the murmur of prayer. When infection threatened to undo what surgery had restored, he wept, not from pain, but from fear that his song might finally be over. Yet love has a stubborn rhythm, and she kept the tempo for him. Again, she'd whisper after each failed step. Again, and slowly, painfully, the notes of his life began to return. Comment 67, or write RIP Donny Osmond to honor her. By early 2020. His recovery was a symphony of struggle and grace. Every movement was a rehearsal, every breath a victory. He described therapy as learning to dance all over again, only this time the floor hurt. When he finally stood, trembling, uncertain, defiant, tears blurred the room. "I didn't hear angels," he later said with a grin. "Just Debbie crying." That summer, he returned to the stage, not as the flawless icon of youth, but as a survivor whose body had learned the language of endurance. The audience rose when he appeared, not for nostalgia, but for reverence. When he sang, his voice carried something deeper, the raw, imperfect beauty of persistence. "Strength isn't standing tall," he told them softly. "It's standing again after you've fallen." And the crowd understood. Every note he sang that night was an act of triumph. Every smile a rebellion against pain. Comment 67, or write RIP Donny Osmond to honor him. Today, his steps are slower, his posture deliberate, but each movement carries meaning. His scars, visible and invisible, are proof of a life fully inhabited. He often says the stage once demanded perfection, but now it demands truth. And truth, he learned, is far more beautiful than perfection could ever be. The man who once sang for survival now sings for peace. He walks, he prays, he laughs. And when the music fades at the end of each night, he closes his eyes and listens not to the roar of the crowd, but to the small, steady rhythm of a heart that has learned to rise again. Comment 67 or write "Rip Donny Osmond" to honor him. The curtain no longer separates stage from sanctuary. Donny Osmond stands before audiences now not as a symbol of youth or fame, but as a testimony of endurance. The applause that once felt like air now feels like wind, gentle, fleeting, but always enough to remind him that he is still part of something larger than his own breath. He no longer chases the crowd's affection. He shares his gratitude with them. Each performance begins in prayer and ends in reflection, a quiet acknowledgement that the very act of standing there, spine aching but unbroken, is itself a kind of resurrection. He talks openly now about the journey that almost ended him, not to dwell on tragedy, but to help others find their own rhythm through pain. When he tells the story of those months in the hospital, he doesn't speak with bitterness. He smiles, as though remembering a teacher rather than a tormentor. Pain, he says, was the greatest instructor of his life, merciless, yes, but thorough. When you can't move, he once explained softly, you finally understand what stillness really is. And when you can move again, you never take it for granted. The audience listens, quiet and moved, and when the first chord strikes, the room becomes a choir of hearts beating in time with his comment 67, or write "Rip Donny Osmond" to honor him. From his home in the sun-warmed valleys of St. George, Utah, Donny has learned to build his days around simplicity, the kind of peace that once felt like a fantasy in the glare of stage lights. His mornings begin with light stretching, soft prayer, and the hum of a familiar melody that finds him before he finds it. The desert has become his cathedral, the wind through the canyons his choir. The home he built with Debbie, a 10,000 square foot oasis of red rock and faith, is filled not with trophies, but with reminders of a life well lived, photographs, instruments, children's drawings, letters from fans who became friends. He often sits in his private studio, surrounded by gold records and framed memories, not to relive them, but to honor them. The floor bears the marks of decades, scuffs from restless rehearsals, the faint smell of cedar and time. There is a room dedicated to prayer, open to the sunrise, where he sometimes hums the same tune he sang as a child, the one that once made his brothers smile, though they could not hear it. In that room, gratitude takes the shape of sound. Comment 67 or write "Rip Donny Osmond" to honor him. Wealth, for him, has never been about excess. The world calls his fortune somewhere between $18 and $20 million, a figure earned not through extravagance, but through endurance. It is the result of thousands of stages, millions of notes, and countless nights spent giving everything he had to the craft. The house, the cars, the shows, they are not emblems of ego, but milestones of persistence. The 1969 Ford Mustang, restored and polished, sits beside a sleek Tesla and an aging Harley-Davidson that still growls across the desert roads when the sun dips low. No yachts, no fleets, no gated opulence. Just a man, his faith, and the horizon. Debbie often teases that he measures life now not by milestones, but by mornings. They rise before dawn, walk the desert trails, and talk about nothing. And somehow, that nothing feels sacred. The marriage that once provoked ridicule has become one of entertainment's rarest triumphs. Nearly half a century of loyalty, laughter, and learning. She still calls him the boy from Utah, and he still looks at her as if every vow they spoke that day in 1978 is still being spoken. In a world obsessed with youth, they have become proof that love, when practiced daily, can outlast time itself. Comment 67 or write "Rip Debbie Osmond" to honor her. Their 5 sons have grown, each carrying a spark of their father's resilience and their mother's grace. Donny Jr., Jeremy, Brandon, Christopher, and Joshua, 5 names that, together, form the quiet rhythm of his later years. They've pursued different paths, one in media, another in music, one in business, another in family life. And now there are 14 grandchildren, 14 small suns that orbit the couple's still burning warmth. When they visit, the house fills with laughter, spilled cereal, and the kind of joyful chaos that makes him smile wider than any standing ovation. "They keep me young," he likes to say, then pauses with a grin and exhausted. Family dinners are loud, imperfect, holy. At the table, he sometimes tells stories from the old days, the kind the grandchildren only half believe, the screaming fans, the flashing lights, the moments when the world belonged to a song. They laugh, wide-eyed, and he laughs too, grateful that they can't quite imagine him as a global idol. To them, he's Grandpa Donny, the man who sneaks dessert before dinner and plays hide-and-seek even when his back aches. Comment 67 or write, "R.I.P. Donny Osmond" to honor him. Faith remains his anchor, not the rigid doctrine of performance, but the gentle discipline of gratitude. Raised in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, he learned early that faith was not about perfection, but persistence. He prays every morning not for success, but for strength to be kind, to stay humble, to endure. He still donates quietly to causes that echo his life song, children's hospitals, veterans groups, and most poignantly, hearing charities in honor of Verl and Tom, his brothers who were born into silence. Through the Olive Osmond Hearing Fund, named for his mother, he has given thousands of children the chance to hear, to feel the world vibrate with sound the way he once hoped his brothers could. Giving someone the gift of hearing, he says, feels like singing again for them. This devotion to faith, to love, to family, is his truest encore. Not the cheers that fade after a show, but the quiet applause of conscience that follows a life lived in harmony with purpose. Comment 67 or write, "R.I.P. Donny Osmond" to honor him, his Las Vegas residency. Aptly titled Donny continues to draw audiences from across generations, but it is no longer a spectacle of sequins and glitter. It is storytelling. He talks between songs, weaving lessons from his decades into melodies that feel more like prayers than performances. Parents bring their children, children bring their parents, and for a brief golden evening, time folds in on itself. The lights glow softer now, not blinding but embracing. When the show ends, he bows, not as a star seeking validation, but as a servant giving thanks. Backstage, he often takes a moment alone before greeting the fans. He looks into the mirror, not to adjust his hair, but to remind himself who he is without the applause. Gratitude, he whispers, the word a habit, a mantra. The same word he's taught his sons and grandchildren. Gratitude for breath, for music, for mornings that still arrive. Comment 67 or write "Rip Donny Osmond" to honor him. At 67. He is less concerned with legacy than with presence. The future no longer frightens him. The past no longer traps him. His greatest joy comes from the ordinary, from watching the sun rise over the red cliffs, from sitting with Debbie as the grandchildren chase light through the yard, from the whisper of wind that moves through his open windows at dusk. He still sings every day, not for an audience, but for the simple pleasure of it, a reminder that the gift still lives in him. The voice that once defined a generation now soothes a smaller circle. His family, his faith, his own heart. Sometimes he hums the melody of "Puppy Love" under his breath while washing dishes. The song that once burdened him now feels like an old friend who never left. Its lyrics, simple and pure, have grown up with him. Once a teenage anthem, now a hymn of endurance. The boy who sang it to millions has become the man who understands it completely. Comment 67 or write, R.I.P. Donny Osmond to honor him. His story is not about perfection, fame, or wealth. It is about faithfulness to a calling, to love, to life itself. It is about falling and standing again, losing everything and finding something greater in return. Donny Osmond has become what few ever managed to be. Not just a legend, but a man fully alive within his legend. He has learned that the world's love is fleeting, but the love you give, that's eternal. And when the lights go out and the curtain falls, somewhere in the distance, a voice still sings, because Donny Osmond's greatest song has never been a hit single or a show-stopping finale. It's the melody of his life, quiet, steadfast, unbroken. A song that keeps playing long after the applause has ended. Comment 67 or write "Rip Donny Osmond" to honor him. Morning light spills over the Utah desert like a slow-moving hymn, and Donny Osmond rises with it. The years have etched quiet wisdom into the lines of his face, yet his eyes still hold the brightness of the boy who once sang for the world. He no longer measures success by applause, nor failure by silence. In this final act of his life's song, balance is the melody. He tends to his garden, stretches his back, and hums scales to greet the day. The air carries faint echoes of his own music from another time, not as ghosts, but as gentle reminders of a journey survived. He has learned that peace is not found in the absence of struggle, but in its acceptance. His mornings begin with gratitude, whispered softly in the stillness before the day's first sound. Debbie often joins him, coffee in hand, her laughter carrying across the porch like wind chimes. They watch the sun lift itself over the canyon and speak about the grandchildren, the memories, the world that somehow keeps turning. She touches his hand, and he feels the same pulse that carried him through every tour, every curtain call, every heartbreak. It is steady. It is home. Comment 67 or write "R.I.P. Donny Osmond" to honor him. On the walls of his home are photographs that trace the arc of his journey, a visual melody from innocence to endurance. There's young Donny on the Andy Williams set, barely tall enough to hold a microphone. Donny and Marie laughing under the studio lights. Donny on stage, mid-spin, frozen in a halo of motion. And then, years later, the photographs shift, his wedding day, the birth of his sons, quiet dinners, grandkids in his lap. Each frame captures a different tempo of the same song. The boy who once needed the world's validation now draws joy from the smallest audience imaginable, his family, his faith, his reflection that sometimes, in the still of evening, he wanders his private studio. The gold and platinum records line the walls like constellations, but his attention always drifts to a smaller frame, a faded picture of his parents, George and Olive, smiling in that steady, proud way that defined them. "You gave me everything," he whispers, even when it felt like too much. Their legacy, built on love and labor, still hums through his life. He credits them not for making him famous, but for teaching him that grace and discipline can live in the same heart. Comment 67 or write "R.I.P. George and Olive Osmond" to honor them. He carries his brothers with him too, not as ghosts, but as harmonies. Verl's quiet strength, Tom's resilience, Meryl's laughter, Wayne's voice, all still echo in the spaces between Donny's words. During performances, when he holds a note a second longer than the arrangement demands, he says it's because he can still feel them singing beside him. "They taught me that family isn't about matching notes," he once said. It's about never dropping the song. On anniversaries, he visits the graves, sometimes alone, sometimes with Debbie. He doesn't bring flowers, he brings stories. He sits, speaks softly about his grandchildren, about the world's strange new music, about the way faith still carries him through every silence. He laughs sometimes, wipes away tears other times, but he always ends with the same promise: "I'm still singing." The wind moves through the grass like applause, and he knows they hear him somehow, Comment 73, or write Rip Wayne Osmond to honor him, pain. The uninvited companion that once haunted him has become a quiet teacher. The spinal injury that nearly stole his movement now serves as a reminder of fragility, of the body's mysterious grace. There are mornings when stiffness greets him before the sun does, when even reaching for his shoes feels like another test of faith. But he smiles through it. The ache, he says, means I'm still alive. He walks slowly now, carefully, intentionally, each step a testament to all the steps he once feared he'd never take again. The body that once leapt across stages now moves with reverence, the way one handles something sacred. His doctor calls it discipline. Donny calls it worship. In his later years, the stage has become both confessional and sanctuary, a place where pain transforms into melody. When he performs, there is no separation between artist and audience. Only truth, shared through sound. The applause that follows feels different now, quieter, deeper. Comment 67 or write R.I.P. Donny Osmond to honor him. For a man who once embodied the chaos of stardom, his world has grown beautifully small. The desert has become his rhythm, the people his harmony. He finds contentment in small acts, watering a plant, mending a chair, teaching his grandchildren to play a simple chord on the piano. It's all the same music, he says. You just learn to listen differently. His faith remains the steady metronome underneath it all. Sundays are sacred, not for ceremony, but for stillness. He no longer performs for fame, but for purpose. When he sings now, it is to remind others that survival itself can be a song. His voice has aged into something human and holy, imperfect, resonant, filled with history. The high notes are fewer, but the depth has never been greater. It's as if every joy and every wound he ever carried have found their place in his tone. The older I get, he tells interviewers, the more I realize the best sound I ever made was just honesty. Comment 67 or write R.I.P. Donny Osmond to honor him. His days are measured not by hours, but by gratitude. Morning light on the sandstone cliffs. Debbie's laughter from the kitchen. A phone call from one of his sons. The sound of grandchildren arguing over board games. These are his gold records now. At night, when the desert sky unfurls its stars, he sits outside and listens to the wind move through the canyon, the same wind that once carried his boyhood songs to the world. He sometimes whispers a prayer of thanks for the body that healed, for the family that stayed, for the faith that never let go. I've spent my whole life trying to find harmony, he said recently. Turns out it was never in the music, it was in the living. He pauses, then smiles and hums the first few notes of Puppy Love. It is not nostalgia. It is remembrance. Every verse he sings now carries all the lives he has touched, all the pain he has endured, all the grace he has received. And when the song ends, he doesn't bow. He simply closes his eyes, lets the last note fade, and whispers, "Thank you." Comment 67 or write Rip Donny Osmond to honor him. So if you listen, really listen, you can still hear him. Not on the radio or television, but somewhere quieter. In the kindness of a stranger. In the resilience of someone who keeps going after the lights go out. In the faith of a man who once sang to survive and now sings to give thanks. Donny Osmond's legacy isn't built of fame or fortune, but of endurance, humility, and love. He is proof that legends don't fade. They evolve. They soften. They return to the earth that raised them and the faith that sustained them. His life has become the truest kind of song, one that does not demand to be heard, but blesses those who do. When future generations look back, they will not just remember the music. They will remember the man who carried it with grace, who stood when he could barely stand, who loved when it hurt, who believed even when belief itself felt impossible. That is his gift to the world, not perfection, but persistence. And in that persistence lies his masterpiece. Comment 67 or write Rip Donny Osmond to honor him.